I'm Casey Seiler, editor of the Times-Union. Before we start this week's episode of NXIVM on Trial, I wanted to take a moment to note that the paper's investigative coverage of Keith Raniere and his organization was supported primarily by our subscribers, whose readership paid the salaries of reporters, copy editors, and digital designers, as well as the lawyers who provided the good counsel that made our work bulletproof against this highly litigious group. If you subscribe to the Times-Union, thanks. If you don't, please consider supporting our watchdog reporting. Without you, the truth might never come to light. All right, and once again, I'm here with Rob Gavin, the Times-Union's outstanding cops and courts reporter. Rob, this is not likely the last episode of NXIVM on Trial, but it is the final episode of this podcast before Keith Raniere is sentenced. We're talking midday on Thursday. His sentencing comes up in Brooklyn on Tuesday.
Yeah, happy to be here again, Casey. It seems like it was never going to get to this day, and finally we're here just a few days away from Keith Raniere's sentencing by senior U.S. District Court Judge Nicholas Garalfas, who presided over the trial last year. This has been delayed many times, initially for the reasons a lot of federal sentencings get delayed, but then obviously the COVID pandemic has also played a huge part here. But this should be a very lengthy sentencing, much like Claire Bronfman's was. I expect it to be a full day at least. And
I think that there's a chance that it could go on into Wednesday, conceivably?
I think it's possible. Right now, I'm not expecting that to necessarily happen. But, I think what happens in federal court, in all courts, is you'll see judges and lawyers make predictions of, we'll probably get to this by this day. And a lot of times it stays later. So I'll just say that I will not be surprised, let's put it that way, if this goes over a day. I think there's a lot of people out there who were very eager to talk about Keith Raniere, even at Claire Bronfman's sentencing. And now that sentencing is here for Raniere himself, this is going to be a very emotional and it's going to be a very long day. So yeah, no one should be surprised if it takes longer than a day. Let's put it that way.
In terms of the court filings, you wrote over earlier in the week about filings by the defense team. Two of the women who were in DOS, the master slave group within NXIVM, claimed in affidavits that they were subject to unscrupulous and even threatening behavior by federal prosecutors who, according to these two women, including Nikki Klein, the former Battlestar Galactica actress, they claim that they were threatened with legal action by federal prosecutors if they testified on behalf of Keith Raniere.
Yeah, Michelle Hatchett and Nikki Klein are both giving a lot of attention to what Keith Raniere has tried to pay a lot of attention to, which is to argue that he has been a victim of the system, the legal system. I know if you remember, one of the big mantras of NXIVM is there are no victims. I will not choose to be a victim. But certainly Keith Raniere has portrayed himself as a victim of the justice system and what he would describe as overzealous prosecutors in the Eastern District. And Nikki Klein and Michelle Hatchett, like you mentioned, both members of DOS. Nikki Klein was a first-line member of DOS, which is one of 8 women who were answering directly to Keith Raniere. She also later wrote a letter on behalf of Keith Raniere later in the week, in which, among other things, she referred to herself as his quote-unquote partner, which is interesting for a number of reasons, including the fact that Nikki Klein, you will remember, was officially the listed spouse of Allison Mack. And Allison Mack was also a first-line slave actress from the show Smallville and very high-profile co-defendant of Keith Raniere, who pled guilty before his trial. So there's a lot to sort of unpack there. But the bottom line is they're saying they were threatened, that she was given a grand jury subpoena after the jury had been put together, and that was inappropriate. So Michelle Hatchett had alleged that she was threatened by the federal prosecutors with a perjury charge if she testified on Raniere's behalf or if she did not testify against Raniere. Now, Michelle Hatchett did not testify against Raniere, and she didn't testify for him either. We haven't seen Michelle Hatchett. The only time I've seen her in court was she was one of the many supporters of him who was there. I should say about 5 or 6 supporters of Raniere who were there at the Claire Bronfman sentencing outside. So time will tell on this, how this is received. But the further you push this, it raises the possibility that they could both be asked to testify at a hearing if it went that far. And then they'll obviously would be under oath at that point. So the judge will have to review these claims in a motion by Mark Agnifilo, who is Raniere's defense attorney. And I think it would be a surprise if the judge decided to listen and overturn his decision based on how things have gone, but we'll see what happens.
Moving to the world of documentary filmmaking, The Vow, HBO's 9-part, docuseries on NXIVM, wrapped up last Sunday. I was watching it. I'm sure you were as well. We reported late last week that The Vow was announced for a second season. That season is going to focus on Keith Raniere's federal trial, which occurred in May and June of 2019. And it also ended with a bit of a surprise. It was audio showing images of the federal lockup in Brooklyn and audio of Raniere saying, "Let's talk," which suggests that the second season would have kind of direct testimony from him to the filmmakers potentially.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting episode to end. It sort of ends with that ominous "let's talk." Raniere has spoken to his supporters. We mentioned Nikki Klein and Michelle Hatchett. Let's not forget that they very recently, that his supporters provided Frank Parlato with an audio from Keith Raniere trying to reach out to Frank Parlato for help. And now it sounds like he's willing to speak to HBO on The Vow season 2. We also shouldn't forget that if you looked at the last few scenes there, it looked like it looked like there was an image of Nancy Salzman lifting up her sash and placing it off, like taking it off. So it would appear, based on what we saw, that Nancy Salzman, who obviously was the number 2, the prefect, it looks like Nancy Salzman may very well have spoken to The Vow. And, I had heard that there was a second season coming for a while, that this was something in which it's going to focus, like you said, on the trial. And the makers of the documentary, Kareem Amir and his wife, Jahan Nojam, the makers of the documentary were at the trial all last year. And I spoke to them. Other reporters spoke to them. And they spent a tremendous amount of time there. And they spent a lot of time. They were there at Claire Bronfman sentencing. I'm sure they'll be there at Keith Raniere sentencing. So there's a lot of material to unpack from the trial. I mean, we didn't see anything at The Vow about the woman in Mexico who was ordered to be in a room for almost 2 years. And we didn't see anything about her family, the family that was basically torn apart by Keith Raniere and NXIVM. And I think that's something that maybe we'll see in the second season. But there's a lot more to tell on this story. So I will be very much looking forward to seeing what they have there. The trial of Keith Raniere in and of itself, as people know, every day uncovered a new level of news and just outright weirdness. And sometimes.
All right. Well, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
If you're enjoying NXIVM on Trial, be sure to check out its sister podcast, The Eagle. I'm Jessica Marshall, host of The Eagle. Each week, we'll take a look inside the newsroom at the Times-Union, the Capital Region's oldest and largest newspaper. We'll discuss the week's top stories, and we'll talk to the award-winning reporters who write them. Listen at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's talk about a story that you're telling, a story that will be going up online on timesunion.com on Friday and in print in Sunday's edition. And that concerns the reasons why, when Keith Raniere did face federal prosecutors, it was not in the capital region where so many of the crimes that he was convicted of were committed, but rather 3 hours plus south in Brooklyn. And it speaks specifically, you talk to a number of NXIVM's victims about their interactions with officials in the capital region, some of them at the local, state, and even federal level, and why all down the line, it appears, they were rebuffed in their efforts to get some official help in bringing Raniere to justice.
We've known for a long time that there was never a real effort in the capital region among law enforcement to go after NXIVM, which as far back as 2003 was reported on by the Times-Union. In 2012, we did this huge series, Jim Adato and Jennifer Gish. There had been a lot of reporting out there, a lot of allegations, and no criminal cases. What happened in 2017, of course, was NXIVM and DOS get revealed. But it could have been revealed a lot earlier, we now find out. I spoke to Sarah Edmondson, who people may know from The Vow, and obviously she was the whistleblower on DOS. She gave the interview with the New York Times in October 2017. So I spoke to Sarah Edmondson, and she told me that on May 30th, 2017, this is before any of this stuff came out, she personally visited the Albany office of the FBI, met with an agent, and explained that DOS existed, that she had been branded, that other women had been branded, and in fact mentioned that she knew there was going to be more brandings. And she told me she gave them addresses, told them who to call, who was involved, and told this to an FBI agent who in turn told her that it sounded a little messed up that it was happening, but that it didn't sound illegal and appeared to be consensual. And Sarah Edmondson never heard back from that agent. You know, she was expecting a raid, according to what she told me. She thought they were going to go right in and raid the place. And she was just sort of shocked that nothing happened. And I also spoke to Sarah's attorney, Neil Glazer, who is the attorney in a civil suit where he represents many victims of NXIVM against Keith Raniere and NXIVM, also filed in Brooklyn. You know, he told me that he was befuddled. That's the word he used. Befuddled by the inaction in the Northern District of New York is what he said, that this woman walked into her office and he said that they made her feel ashamed and that they judged Sarah Edmondson, and that's just inexcusable to him. Not only was there a lack of law enforcement going after NXIVM, but people who were whistleblowers on NXIVM found themselves facing the law. And I spoke to a number of former members of NXIVM who, to a large degree, you get many of the same answers. Why? Why did this happen? And they will talk about how much money was poured into, in their view, the political arena and other things.
I want to talk specifically about one of those folks, and that's Barbara Boucher, who was a successful financial planner, a successful businesswoman, who was drawn into NXIVM, became, I think it's fair to say, sort of a member of its senior leadership team, and then broke with the organization, found herself and her professional existence threatened by NXIVM's litigation machine, and fought back not only against their civil assault, but also the potential that she could face criminal charges.
I'm the elephant in the room that he can't explain away, excuse away, and say, well, she did this, she lied here, because I did not.
Yes, within 18 hours of leaving NXIVM, Barbara Boucher was served with civil and criminal actions for what they viewed as alleged extortion. She had told Raniere that she had money owed to her and wanted that money back, and they tried to use that as an extortion case. This is a recurring theme with NXIVM, where people try to leave them, and then NXIVM would use their powers that they had, their influence. They would certainly try to get authorities to bring criminal charges against those people who had left. Barbara Boucher said she went to a number of different agencies including the Attorney General's office, the state tax department, federal investigators, and that at one point, this just took a very long time. At times there looked like there would be an investigation. When she first was threatened with that extortion case, she said she talked to an attorney who then quickly called up federal prosecutors in Albany and was told that, oh, well, there's already a case being built against those people. So that's something that I wouldn't worry about, so to speak. But nothing happened. And as years go by, Barbara said that she continues to have hope and meet with agencies and think that something's going to happen. And at some point she meets with the Charities Bureau of the Attorney General's office.
I worked with them for several months and with the chief bureau agent of the Crimes Division of Charities Fraud. And then after 3 months, I kid you not, this is what he said to me: Barb, it is clear that there's corruption here. However, we have bigger fish to fry.
That's what she said. She was told by the AG's office. I'm waiting for a response from the AG's office on that. They did get back to me, but I don't know what their take is going to be officially on that. The same way I'm waiting for a response from the FBI, and I'm sure they'll have one, about why was Sarah Edmondson's complaint not taken seriously.
What else did Barbara Boucher talk?
Well, Barbara Boucher was really concerned about the fact that this was something that, in her view, this was a long time coming. And this had taken 11 years. It was really a story of frustration. And she talked about Keith Raniere and her relationship with Keith Raniere and what that was like. When I asked her, what this was like, she essentially said that Keith Raniere was not playing with a full deck, in her view, and that she realized that this was someone who does the things he does because he's not all there, in her view.
He's a delusional, sick man, and that's what it all comes down to. And I've always predicted that he will go down in history like another one of the Charles Manson and Jim Jones in the Waco, Texas, because people can't wrap their heads around it.
Barbara Boucher certainly, makes very, repeated notice of the fact that she is a Troy native. She's a hometown girl, as she puts it. She's from Troy. She had made some success of herself as a financial planner, and then NXIVM and Raniere's vindictiveness caused her to move across the country. It's really a sad story that ultimately she was able to triumph over because, obviously Raniere is going to prison and Barbara Boucher is going to be delivering a victim impact statement.
Well, Rob, thanks a lot. I know we will be talking again next week after the sentencing of Keith Raniere. I'm sure that is going to be a dramatic conversation and a memorable court proceeding to be at. Thanks as well to you for your service, and thanks to all of the subscribers to the Times-Union who help make our investigations, including our deep and years-long looks at the operations of NXIVM, possible. Talk to you next week.